Hi guys, hope you had a great weekend so far. Today's a beautiful day, so get out and enjoy that sunshine. Okay, so I wanted to remind you of last week's study. So we looked at a reputation of strength, and we also looked at a reputation of courage, and we're focusing on the book of Daniel. um, and last week we learned about what happened with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and when they didn't want to bow down to the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had, they were thrown into the fiery furnace, but God rescued them because of their faith, and um, they didn't crumble amidst the fear of the punishment that they were going to receive for not bowing down. They trusted in God and had faith. So this week's study, we're going to look at a reputation of being humble from kidssundayschool.com. And but first, I thought it was interesting because just yesterday I received in my inbox a little devotional, and I wanted to read you that because it had exactly to do with what we were talking about last week for our topic in Sunday school, and I thought it was encouraging. So let me read that to you now from Streams in the Desert for Kids on Bible Gateway. It says, how to please God. When we are facing a tough, extreme, or tragic situation, our faith is either strengthened or destroyed. Consider the heat of a fire, the intensity. Most things can withstand its heat, as it can consume entire forests and neighborhoods in a matter of days. But the same fire doesn't burn up gold. It instead purifies it. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced the furnace, they confirmed they would praise only the living God. It was a death sentence. They could have decided to save themselves by doing what the king wanted, but their faith would have been unreliable, burned up in the midst of danger. Instead, they went against the king by keeping their loyalty to the Lord. Their faith was purified, and they didn't waver, and they decided, because the holy object of their faith never wavers, and God did save them in the most dramatic way. After they were thrown into fire, they walked out without a scratch or burn, nothing. They were unharmed. In an impossible situation, faith recognizes that the only hope is God. If you're facing a desperate time, remember your faith is being purified. If you don't know all the answers, your faith is being developed. You may be overwhelmed by uncertainty and doubt, but your faith is being strengthened. So I think that's so important to remember that even if you don't know everything, you know that you're developing this faith in God and your relationship and your walk with God. So today let's look at Daniel and a reputation of being humble. And what does that mean? Well, we want to be humble and honor God, and rather than be boastful and act selfishly. So we're going to look at some scenarios so we can really understand, well, what is being humble? What is humility? So one of our verses for this week that I want you to memorize for our memory verse, it comes from James 4 verse 10. And it says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. So we want to look at and remind ourselves of what happened with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego last week, and King Nebuchadnezzar, and how King Nebuchadnezzar, when he saw that they came out unharmed, changed, and he believed in the God of Daniel, in our God. So we're going to give a bit of a recap and look at some of chapter 4 so that we can understand chapter 5 and what it leads into. So sometime after Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego survived that fiery furnace, King Nebuchadnezzar had a disturbing vision. So he sought Daniel again to explain what his vision meant. So Daniel interpreted the vision for the king and told him that he would live like a wild animal until he finally changed his ways. So he would live like a wild animal for many years, or until he gave up this sinful life that he was living by acknowledging God as Lord of all. So that was King Nebuchadnezzar's scary vision that he had and Daniel's interpretation of it. So just as Daniel said, the vision came true, and King Nebuchadnezzar lived like a wild animal. And he lived like that until he finally changed his ways. In fact, he even said from the Bible, "Now I, King Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride, he is able to humble." Ooh, there's that word humble. That came from Daniel 4, verse 37. So that was amazing. King Nebuchadnezzar humbled himself before the Lord. And unfortunately, after King Nebuchadnezzar's reign was over, sometime afterwards, sorry, I'm tongue-tied, his son Belshazzar became king. So now we have a King Belshazzar who took over for King Nebuchadnezzar. So King Belshazzar, he was not a very humble man. So he did not honor God, nor did he humble himself. So instead, he did his best to fight against the Lord. And then a message came to King Belshazzar and came to him in a strange way. So let's read Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 to 30, and let's find out what that message was that came to King Belshazzar. And let's see what it said. So I want you to open your Bibles to Daniel 5, and we're going to read verses 1 to 30. Okay, so it says, "The writing on the wall." Ooh, I'm excited to hear what this says. "King Belshazzar gave a big banquet for 1,000 royal guests, and he drank wine with them. As Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave an order to his servants. He told them, 'Bring the gold and silver cups that his ancestor Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem.' King Belshazzar wanted his royal guests to drink from those cups. He also wanted his wives and his slave women to drink from them. So he brought the gold cups. They had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his royal guests, his wives, and his slave women drank from them. As they were drinking, they praised their gods. Those gods were made from gold, silver, and bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Then suddenly, a person's hand appeared. These fingers wrote words on the plaster of the wall. This was near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. King Belshazzar was very frightened. His face turned white and his knees knocked together. He could not stand up because his legs were too weak, like jelly beans or gummy worms or something. The king called for the magicians and the wise men to be brought to him. He said to the wise men of Babylon, "I will give you a reward to anyone who can read this writing and explain it. I will give him purple clothes to fit for a king. I will put a gold chain around his neck, and I will make him the third highest ruler in the kingdom." So all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing, and they could not tell the king what it meant. King Belshazzar became even more afraid. His face became even more whiter. His royal guests were so confused. Then the king's mother came in the banquet room. She had heard the voices of the king and his royal guests. She said, "My king, live forever. Don't be afraid. Don't let your face be white with fear. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the days of your father, this man showed understanding, knowledge, and wisdom. He was like the gods in these things. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, put this man in charge of all the wise men. He ruled over all the fortune tellers, magicians, and wise men. The man I am talking about, his name is Daniel." The king gave him the name Belshazzar. He was very wise and he had knowledge and understanding. He could explain dreams and secrets. He could answer very hard problems. Call for Daniel. He will tell you what the writing on the wall means. So they brought Daniel to the king. The king said to him, "Is your name Daniel? Are you the one of the captives my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and I have heard that you are very wise and have knowledge and understanding." The wise men and magicians were brought to me to read this writing on the wall. I want those men to explain to me what it means, but they could not explain it. I have heard that you are able to explain what things mean, and you can find the answers to hard problems. Read this writing on the wall and explain it to me. If you can, I will give you purple clothes fit for a king, and I will put a gold chain around your neck, and you will become the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourselves, or you may give those rewards to someone else. I will read the writing on the wall for you, and I will explain to you what it means. My king, the Most High God, made your father Nebuchadnezzar a great, important, and powerful king. God had made him very important, so all the people, nations, and those who spoke every language were very afraid of Nebuchadnezzar. If he wanted a person to die, he put that person to death, and if he wanted a person to live, he let that person live. If he wanted to promote a person, he promoted him. And if he wanted a person to be unimportant, he made him unimportant. But Nebuchadnezzar came too proud. He became too proud and stubborn, so he was taken off his royal throne. His glory was taken away. Then Nebuchadnezzar was forced away from people. His mind became like the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and was fed grass like an ox. He became wet with dew. These things happened to him until he learned his lesson. The Most High God rules over the kingdoms of men, and the Most High God sets anyone he wants over those kingdoms. But Belshazzar, you already knew these things. You are a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. But still you have not been sorry for what you have done. Instead, you have turned against the Lord of heaven. You ordered the drinking cups from the temple of the Lord to be brought to you. Then you and your royal guests drank wine from them. Your wives and your slave women also drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. They are not really gods. They cannot see or hear or understand anything. But you did not honor God. He is the one who has power over your life and everything you do. So God sent that hand that wrote on the wall. These are the words that were written on the wall. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. This is what the words mean. Mene. God has counted the days until your kingdom will end. Tekel. You have been weighed on the scales and found not good enough. Parsin, your kingdom is being divided. It will be given to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave an order for Daniel to be dressed in purple clothes. A gold chain was put around his neck, and he was announced to be the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very same night, Belshazzar the king of Babylonian people was killed. A man named Darius the Mede became the new king. Darius was 62 years old. Wow, so that is really interesting what happened. So let's take a look so we can understand this a little bit better. So we're going to look and do some questions and thinking about what the question means and what the answer means as well. So let's look at what gods did Belshazzar and his nobles praise. Can you remember that part in the scripture? Well, they praised the gods of gold and silver. While they were drinking, what did they see written on the walls? So what did they see writing on the wall actually? And they saw what was fingers on a human hand. That's why Belshazzar went white as a ghost. Why did the king ask Daniel to come to him? Why did he seek Daniel? Well, he hoped that Daniel could tell him what that writing meant. So why do you think the sin of Belshazzar was even greater than his father, Nebuchadnezzar, the sin of his father? So the big sin here for Belshazzar was that although he knew the truth, he chose not to humble himself and even fought against the Lord. So when Nebuchadnezzar lived like a wild animal, that humbled Nebuchadnezzar. And that humbled him to believe in God instead of following his own ways and doing his things that he was doing that was sinful. And whereas Belshazzar refused to listen and refused to humble himself and refused to follow God. And instead he was believing in all these idols and having his people believe in them as well. So how did Daniel describe the things that the king was praising? Well, they couldn't see or hear or understand. They didn't get it. So what did the writing on the wall say? Well, all of those 3 words that were written and the meanings behind them basically said that the king's reign, that means him being king over the kingdom, is at an end. It's going to be over. And his kingdom is going to be given away to another leader. We find out that that is given to Darius, and he becomes King Darius. So we have to do this thinking question, and I think it's really important. So we can do this as our own little thinking question and own reflection. But what is the difference between being boastful and being humble? And so we're going to look at another scripture in the Bible. And it's called the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisees. And this one will help us learn the difference between humility and pride. Okay, so pride sometimes leads us to boast about something in ourselves and takes away from what God is doing in our lives. We want to be that person that is humble before God and before others. So let's look at this parable. It's in Luke 18, verses 10 to 14. And it says, 2 men went up to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself. God, I thank you that I am not like the other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me. Oh, I am a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Those are amazing words and a great description, because we see the Pharisees, oh, I am so mighty and so amazing and I do all these great things and I'm just perfect. That is not humbling yourself. That is being prideful. Whereas we see that the tax collector was crying out to God, saying, God, have mercy on me because I am a sinner. And God, he likes humility. And when we recognize that we need God and that we can't do everything on our own, and all of the things that we have in our lives are from God, that is so important. That's being humbled. And he says that being humble is what will make you exalted, not being prideful or boastful. So when we boast about what we have or look down on someone who is less fortunate, we're basically telling God, you know what, God, you're not important. And that we can do things on our own and we don't need him. And that is not good. That will lead us to a lot of hurt and pain in our lives. So this is very far from the truth, right? We do need God, and all good things come from God. By ourselves, we are nothing, but therefore we must live a humble life before God and admit that without him, we really are lost. And to avoid being proud, we must acknowledge and thank him for all he has given us. So when we do this, God will exalt us. And remember that God, he knows what's in our hearts. We can't hide these things from us. So we want our hearts to reflect his love and the fruits of the Spirit. And that is being, humility is a great fruit to have. So just so you can get a better example of what it means to be boastful or humble, I'm going to give you some examples, some scenarios. So example 1, oh, well, Johnny was humble because he thanked his mother for her encouragement. Johnny could say, oh, Mom, you know, I've been struggling with this, and I know I got frustrated and maybe sometimes irritable with trying to do it, but Mom, thank you so much. Thank you for your encouragement. That's a way of being humble. Example number 2, Tammy was boastful because she looked out at outward appearances. She thought her dress was better than the other girls' dresses and went out of her way to tell the others just how pretty it was. So that would be like Tammy going out and saying, oh, your dress is horrible. Mine is the most beautiful. Look at how beautiful my fancy dress is. Oh, it's nothing like yours. Mine is so much more better. So that would be an example of being prideful and boastful, not humble at all. And oftentimes when we're prideful and boastful, we end up hurting other people's feelings, and we don't want to do that. That doesn't show God's love. So example number 3, Carl was humble because although he knew he came from a wealthy family, he didn't act like it. Carl was also very generous. So that meant that Carl had a lot of money. He came from a family that was rich and had a lot of money and a lot of things. But he didn't flaunt that. He didn't show that he was rich to others. And instead, he was very giving, very generous. And that is a great example of being humble. Okay, example number 4. Liz was boastful because she thought her earthly accomplishments were all she needed. She didn't want Jesus in her life. I say, oh, I got myself this great mark and I did it all by myself. God didn't give me any wisdom. This was all of my own. That would be an example of being boastful and prideful. Example 5. James was boastful because he compared his possessions with what others had and would laugh at people who had less materiality. So James was boastful about that he would have more things like that than other people would have. So for example, even just a clothing item. Oh, I have Nike Airs and you have these no-name brand running shoes. Or I have 20 million Bakugans and you have none. Ha ha ha. So that's not very nice, is it? That's being boastful. It's not being humble. Okay, last example. Justin was humble because he didn't leave a mess for his mother to clean up, but rather took the initiative to clean up the mess that his sister made without being asked. That is a great example of humility. The brother cleans up the mess his sister made so that he can help his mother. Did his mom ask him to help her? No, he did it in his own goodness and goodwill in helping and what God had taught him to do in helping others. He did it himself. No one needed to ask him to do it. And he was humble and kind to do that. So these are great examples and scenarios, things that we can think of to kind of give us an idea of what it means to be boastful and what it means to be humble. And remember that, like Daniel, we want to build a reputation of being humble. We don't want to be like King Belshazzar, who didn't want to listen and was just so all about himself and boasting about all that he had and all that he could give and bowing down to these gold idols and worshiping money and worshiping this wealthiness and control and power as a king instead of worshiping God. We really don't want to be like that. So we have learned that building a reputation is built by doing something over and over. And we want that reputation and doing something over and over to be something good that we're doing over and over. To have a reputation for being humble, we must constantly honor and give thanks to God for all the things that He has given us and that He has allowed us to do. There will be many times in our lives that we will have more than something else or someone else. We might have a newer toy than a kid down the street, or we might get a better grade than somebody else. We might, never have all of these things that someone else might not have. But we must never look down on someone else because they are less fortunate. Likewise, we should never think that whatever it is we have is because of something we did, because all good things come from God, and He alone is worthy of our praise. He gives us all these things, and He gives us wisdom to do these things and succeed in them, and He directs our paths. He's our compass. He guides us. He's our GPS. If we get running off the road in the wrong direction, God is the one who gives us the right direction to get back on the right road, the right path. And we have to remember that. That's so important. And so we remember, our breath, our life, this all comes from God each day. He gives us these blessings. And that is something that we want to boast in, is boast in the Lord and be humble in the Lord. So I want to encourage you this week. I posted a little activity for you to do. It's a boastful or humble scenario worksheet. So I want you to print that off. Or go through it if you don't have a printer, and just maybe read it through and answer those questions in your head, or fill it out on the worksheet and have fun doing that. And remember, your other challenge for this week is to do the memory verse that we talked about at the beginning, and that comes from James 4 verse 10. So I want you to practice this week on memorizing that verse, and that will help you to always walk in a way of humility instead of pride and boasting. Okay, so I hope you guys have a great week. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or just send me a message and I can answer those for you. Okay, take care and enjoy the sun. God bless.